So thanks to CSAP for the opportunity to work on this one. The topic being potential contaminants of concern for the most common commercial and industrial activities. It's definitely an interesting topic with lots of membership interest. And props to Zayed Mohammed from our office, who's the primary author on this, with Will Garrity and input from myself and Simon. So we were asked to take a shot at this because it was known that we have an internal list that we use for this stuff, albeit it's unrefined and rough and unreferenced. So this was still a challenge for us to take on. So the need, as described to us from CSAP, was that APs and practitioners have different opinions on what PCOCs apply to different industrial activities. There's variation between APs within companies, let alone between companies. And we all want a resource and a framework to help make investigation choices. And this could be useful in AP reviews of submissions. It could be useful in audits. So the scope of the project that we took on, which came about in maybe the middle of January, was to create a draft guidance document outlining the normal PCOC associated with the most common commercial and industrial activities. So we knew that we wanted to move the ball forward on this. We knew it's unrealistic we were going to create something perfect. We wanted to create a draft for discussion with the technical review committee that asked us to do it, and then ultimately with some industry reps and then the membership at large. So to create something useful was really what we were up against. So as we started through this process, what this presentation is about, some of the challenges that we came up against, the topics that we discussed, and then what we ended up with. So as we started down this road, there is the topic of how do you create, do you create a checklist? Do you create something totally prescriptive, or that's maybe at one extreme of the spectrum, or do you create something that's purely philosophical and heuristical that makes you think of the choices that you need to make? Because we know that no document that we create is going to replace professional judgment and a good stage one. There was the topic of how do you source the membership's experience through this? There's not a great way to do that at the moment. There's all the references. I mean, we ended up, there's about 3.5 pages of references. There's EPA stuff and Health Canada stuff and every jurisdiction out there. They don't all agree with each other. There's the text. What's the product that gets created? What does the guidance look like? Is it text, or is it some sort of spreadsheet? The internal version that we had before this was a spreadsheet. We started down that road, and that's the next slide. I'm going to talk a bit about how we started on that and the limitations of that. There's the APEC versus Schedule II use. Part of us wanted to create this by Schedule II use because that's in the regulation, but it's not a list of APECs. It's a list of Schedule II uses, and some industrial uses have many different APECs, and many of the Schedule II uses will have overlapping APECs. There's the whole omnibus thing, which is large. There's a lot of new regulated parameters, a lot of new standards, and not, that does have an effect on whether things are PCOCs or not, and that will change over time. There's the emerging contaminants, and then there's the product created. How do you make it useful to the membership, and then the ministry's interest as well. The ministry wants good characterization of sites. So we actually started down the matrix path. We thought, so it was appealing for the reason of organization. You could list all the Schedule II uses, or maybe with all the specific uses on, in the rows. You could put every regulated parameter there is and their CAS number in the columns. You can have it expandable and collapsible by substance group, and then there's all the discussion of what the substance groups are now that they're, the way the omnibus stuff has laid out the substances. So we did go down that road, and the challenge with this is you do get into the danger of the checklist format. It's hard to encompass the whole, the nuances of all of this stuff. So the temporal nature of PCOCs, PCOCs that change over time. I mean, you could have another dimension to this matrix that has time. You could put comments in, and all the specifics of any particular situation. So if metal plating, the type of metal plating, or whatever industrial process it is, what are the specifics of that process? So it's hard. It gets too prescriptive. And the topic also came through this. How do you maybe this could be some sort of crowdsourced wiki type document where it's being managed by someone and people can add comments. And anyways, we ended up not completely abandoning this format, but putting it aside. And we're providing it in as food for thought to the technical review committee. But for now, we've put that aside. So we ended up choosing a text version and going with that. Similar in format to the soil vapor guidance that came out. It's a more digestible format, but it allows for a description of the general guidance principles, so that overarching description of, and I actually think I'll read some of that because we've got time to do it. So the intro and layout of the thinking behind the document. And it also does provide specific guidance and information and things to be aware of for 25 or so of the Schedule II uses. So just to give some context to the whole, so what we end up with is maybe a 30-page document with references. So the way this is laid out is that specific land uses were chosen from Schedule II, and Zayed got a list from someone at the ministry who I should thank of the ranking of which Schedule II uses are most common in the site registry. And then all the PCOCs were chosen from only regulated parameters in the omnibus amendments to the CSR. So the PCOCs listed in the document are not exhaustive and are intended as a guide only. Professionals should apply judgment and data from site-specific Stage 1 preliminary site investigation when deciding which PCOCs should be investigated. And when deciding which PCOCs to include, investigators may wish to consider the following. And there's just a few of these items, but I think that they are worth mentioning here. So PCOC for a given land use may differ depending on the specific activities performed and specific inputs or effluents from those activities. So for example, PCOCs for wood treatment will depend on the type of treatment being applied. So the classic being that PAHs from creosote wouldn't necessarily be what you're looking for at a site that's treated with chlorophenols. And so that particular one may seem obvious, but it's just that there's so many rabbit holes in creating a document like this that you can't ignore the fact that you have to think your way through a stage one. Similarly, PCOCs in an automotive repair operation that paints cars would be different from an operation that does not paint cars. PCOCs might depend on what activities were conducted. So classic examples are when activities were conducted. So contaminants that were phased out through regulation, examples being leaded fuel and PCBs, or chlorofluorocarbons. So assigning PCOCs based on dates is not always a clear-cut thing, and again, a hard thing to completely prescribe in a document. And so a particular thing there might be the PCBs, might not be a PCOC for electrical equipment manufacturing after 1979, but would continue to be a PCOC for electric equipment refurbishing. Large and complex sites such as sawmills, pulp and paper mills, and petroleum production sites may have auxiliary activities or Schedule II uses on their own. For example, fueling, storage, and distribution. PCOCs can degrade into other contaminants. So for example, dry cleaning solvent, PERC can degrade into the other products. And then investigators may wish to differentiate between primary and secondary contaminants. This idea is relevant where the presence of some PCOC are not expected without other primary PCOCs. So for example, gasoline contamination, where some fuel additives are unlikely to exceed standards unless the primary petroleum hydrocarbons are also present. So I'll talk a little bit more about this later on. Similar categorizations can be made in other scenarios, such as PCBs in hydraulic oil or metals and waste oil, dioxins and furans and chlorophenols. So that's some of the intro. That's actually most of the intro to the document. And then there's specific discussion for 25 to 30 different Schedule II activities. So just a little bit more on the PCOC or the primary secondary topic, because it is something that's broadly used by many consultants in slightly different ways. The broader definition is that if you don't find this regulator parameter, you're unlikely to find these other regulated parameters. There's things to be careful. So the classic examples, but there's many, and they could be controversial to some, but it's a topic for discussion. So metals or glycols in waste oil. If you don't find oil, you're unlikely to find these other substances. Things to be careful of in this whole topic are different relative standards. Something that's got a very low standard compared with something that's got a very high standard. And the omnibus changes also play into this. So things that are have just become regulated, or the standard has just dropped, and we don't know yet. None of us know what the drivers are going to be to investigations, which gets into this topic of how do you take a document like this and then gather the experience of the industry over time. And especially with the topic of what really drives remediation. There's There's a lot of experience, especially in this room, on that. There's not necessarily good data on it or statistics on it. So what's missing in all this? It's a start. And where this is at is that the draft document was provided to the Technical Review Committee just a few weeks ago, and then we met with one of the reps from that committee, AJ Tumber, and then Dave Newton as a guru, detail-oriented person, and Peter Kickham, and we've got good feedback on it. I'll talk more about the next steps in it, but we feel like we have moved the ball forward. There's some things that it doesn't necessarily address, like what shouldn't we be looking for, or the group experience here on things that we look for but we don't find. There's also that we don't want a lot of unexpected consequences or looking for things that we don't need to be looking for. Some examples that came up through the discussion and the mini workshop that we had on it are things like chloroform and soil vapor. The anions and cations topic came up because it's an example of one of those things that people, for instance, might have been looking for hydrogeological studies and then realize, oh crap, I exceed a bunch of standards for this. It doesn't segregate between matrices, so soil vapor, groundwater, soil, sediment. That was also another one of those rabbit holes that this exponentially expands the scope of what we're trying to do and seemed beyond our reach in the time and budget that we had. And we're already limited enough in this whole being overly prescriptive issue, so it would just magnify that challenge. And the whole novel contaminants topic. So we somehow need to gather information over this next year or so on what's relevant, what's important. Yeah, some of the research that just went into this whole process was looking up, the new regulated parameters and what they're used in, and some things like the nonal phenol ethoxylates that seem to be in surfactants and everything. What's going to happen there? So what is next for this is that the rest of the technical review committee is going to look at this. I think Peter Reed said he'd had a look at it as well. We'd like to get it to the whole membership in draft and get feedback on it. And the technical review committee can talk about this part, but to what period does this comment period go on? And maybe it goes on forever. I don't know. Maybe it goes on for some period and this gets issued. I certainly haven't figured out this part. What do you do with a document like this? I think the people that have looked at it agree that it's useful, but where does it go from here? Is there a way to create some kind of wiki type thing where the membership can add comments and track comments? I was imagining the cyber bullying that could happen on this topic. This would have to be some sort of some kind of moderated wiki thing with some heavy policing. Do we repeat this a year from now or 2 years from now or every so many years? So with that, and I know that only a few people here have seen the document, and that I think it will be coming out in some form in the next, before November for sure. and hopefully in the near future. There's a couple things we wanted to tidy up in it. And with that, I will welcome any questions, and I'll deflect as many of them as I can to Zayed. Who's going to be a new member soon? Is probably in the next month. Thank you.
We've got about 10 minutes for questions, so hit them.
Yes, sir.
Can you identify any surprises? Maybe there weren't any, but...
No, there was. I mean, for me as a reader, and I think in the workshop, there were quite a few surprises. So it's certainly an interesting thing to go through. So just an example, like electrical transmission and distribution substations. So electrical substations contain transformers and other electrical equipment that may contain or have previously contained oils, PCBs or PERC. Vegetation is the threat to equipment and underground grounding wires and is often aggressively controlled with herbicides. And that's actually, I think, the one that was up on the screen there before. So you've got PCOCs from transformer oils and dielectrics and transformers and handling of and storage of cables and electrical components and vegetation control. And some of, to me as somebody who doesn't work with transmission and substations much, that would be, the herbicide part would be useful to me as somebody, if you asked me to do an investigation of a substation. So I don't think, I would be surprised if anybody looked through this and just said, well, I didn't know all that stuff already. Because we all work in different, parts of the field that we work in. And that goes for a lot of these for me, because I've been doing this for a while, but I do a lot of the urban sites. And a lot of the Schedule II uses that some of you may work on quite a bit, I haven't worked on. As far as like those types of surprises, or what kind of surprises? Yeah.
I mean, look at service station PCOC.
Yeah.
I mean, we all deal with service stations.
Yeah, and so I did mention also the Paul Gordon, the industry rep director, is going to look at this also. And the service stations and the omnibus new regulated parameters, that's one that we will want to be careful in what's on that list. At this point, the service station one, I don't think there'd be any big surprises on that one. But yeah, no, I think people will be interested to read this, no doubt. Colin?
Are you able to peg any dates for some of these things, like lead and gasoline, that sort of thing, to say, well, I didn't look for lead because this station has only been around since blah, blah, blah?
Rough dates, but okay, so this goes to the whole topic of rationale. So yeah, there is dates throughout this for some of those types of things, and as came up in that workshop as well. Yes, there's disagreement on some of these things, but in performance assessments, if there's rationale for why you're looking for things, it's often well received, because we know none of us have perfect agreement on all these things, within limits. But yes, there's dates. But I wouldn't say pegged necessarily, but things to consider, say on the lead issue. Alan?
Your argument, make it clear what basis.
Yeah. And I mean, one thing that I think looking through this is just, the list of references that are in here might be useful. I mean, on that reference topic, Zayed would come by and say, there's so much difference in opinion between all these references. Like if you ask me to pin just about any PCOC with a large APEC or with a large schedule to use, like a foundry, I can find a reference that will do that. So it is, I mean, it would be nice if we can, I mean, not that this would ever, not by our own doing of our version of this document, but if over time we could get some kind of general consensus as to what the PCOCs in waste oil and fill alone would be useful. So actually, through the discussion with the committee, that's also one thing we're going to add to this, because waste oil and fill aren't themselves scheduled to use activities, but they're two of the ones that seem to have the broadest disagreement and most common, and that's a fairly easy couple of additional things for us to add. Alan, sir?
Yeah, I apologize if I missed it, but are there other jurisdictions that are trying to do this and lay out this kind of guidance, or maybe even up to putting it in the grant potentially?
Yeah, good question. I know Zed looked at a lot of stuff. I don't think he found anything like that.
I have this recollection that either CCN or Environment Canada back east at one point.
Yeah.
Tried to do just this, and they listed industrial.
Yeah, well, I mean, Health Canada seemed to be one of the most, like, as far as what, if you call those jurisdictions, Health Canada was one of the most useful ones.
In terms of harnessing experience, sorry if you already covered this, but let's say as we do with example borehole logs for submissions, what if we submitted some example analytical results just for the APEC of waste oil, let's say? Or fill might be a little more complicated because there could be competing APECs,
Yeah, that's
but
a super interesting
build
idea.
a database, and then BC could be the leader in.
Yeah. No, it's a super interesting idea. I like an APEC and PCOC list as part of your submission in the Excel format.
Sure, or electronically would be probably even better, but something to build on this, the experience that we gain with every site that we investigate.
Yeah.
If we really harness that, we could have a definitive answer in a year.
Yeah. Guy?
Just a comment. Some of the U.S. states have lists of these things for contaminants associated with industry, and those have been out there for decades. What I see, though, here, there's a danger that this list, it sounds like if we treat it like some of our other guidance documents that soon become like protocols.
Gospel, yeah.
Again, we're going to be spending a lot more money than we really keep to. So.
We're like having lists that are too long, yeah.
Yeah, and from a regulatory standpoint, you want to have a comprehensive list because you don't want someone to, cause pollution, so you need a comprehensive list. And there'll be others that just want a simple list to use as indicators, and then if they find stuff, they'll go test it.
Yeah, that's the crux.
Big potential to be, I'll just use the word misused in BC, and I'd like to know that we'll be prudent as we move forward with this thing.
Absolutely. And you're on the tech review committee, aren't you?
Correct.
Yeah, so perfect. Yeah. Lori?
What's your point?
Yeah.
I think time for one more question.
Did you go back and talk to the people that put together the original Schedule 2 list back in 1997, like Glenn, and find out what they thought about potential contaminants?
No, that's a good point, though. Glenn and...
Glenn Fox.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, but
Glenn and who else, yeah.
Yeah. All right, thank you. Sorry.
In developing your list, have you also looked at striking off compounds that are commonly are commonly considered PCOCs but actually shouldn't be recognized as PCOCs. The classic one would be benzoylpyrene in groundwater at a gasoline site,
Yes.
where the chemistry says it shouldn't appear, but we get it because it would be affixed to sediments.
That definitely was something we were trying not to include. I'd have to check the benzoylpyrene because that is the classic one that we really shouldn't be finding and arguably looking for. But that's absolutely part of our intent for this document, is not to have things on here that shouldn't be on here, because we all agree we either don't find them or shouldn't find them. And again, that's something we'd really like to get feedback from a bigger group on, and would absolutely be part of the comments period for this document. Thank you.